My name is Ryan Mitchell, I'm 32 years old, and this is what happened to me. It started as a much-needed escape from the chaos of city life. I'd spent the better part of a year buried in deadlines and stress, and when my old RV, my trusted chariot for weekend adventures, announced its aging complaints with flickering lights and an odd rattling noise from the engine, I figured it was just a sign of time passing. I didn't think much of it until our trip took us deep into Shawnee National Forest, near the rugged red hills of southern Illinois, in the biting chill of late autumn. I wasn't traveling alone. Along for the ride were 3 friends who'd been with me through thick and thin. Sam Carter, a soft-spoken yet fiercely curious folklore enthusiast, had spent countless hours poring over local legends and dusty manuscripts about ancient curses and vengeful spirits. Tyler Brooks, our resident skeptic and joker, had a knack for dismissing ominous warnings with a sardonic laugh. And then there was Erin Delgado, whose gentle, empathetic nature made her acutely sensitive to the moods of both people and the natural world around her. We left the city one crisp Friday afternoon, the promise of a quiet weekend under autumn skies fueling our excitement. The plan was simple: park the RV in a remote clearing, set up camp, explore the forest trails, and share stories around a crackling campfire. Sam was particularly excited because she'd discovered references to a local variant of the Wendigo, a malevolent spirit rooted in indigenous lore that, according to whispered accounts, had adapted over time to haunt these very woods. I wasn't one to believe in ghosts or cursed legends, but there was something about the thinning daylight and rust-colored leaves that hinted we might be in for more than just a pleasant retreat. The RV rumbled along uncomfortably on gravel roads, its interior lights dancing as if in protest against the encroaching dark. I kept a mental checklist of minor repairs I'd been postponing, but for that weekend, the allure of adventure was too strong to let practical worries intrude. We arrived at our destination just as dusk began to settle over the forest. The clearing was remote and raw, a forgotten pocket of nature bordered by towering oaks and rough-hewn rocks that the locals called the Red Hills. After setting up camp, we gathered around a small portable stove and a makeshift fire pit. The conversation started light. Tyler joked about the RV's quirks, while Sam eagerly described the ancient symbols and stories associated with the land. "There's something about this place," she murmured, eyes distant with both excitement and apprehension, "that feels older than time itself." Erin, who'd been uncharacteristically quiet, offered a gentle nod and a half-smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. That first night, as I lay in the small cot above the RV, I listened to the usual nighttime symphony, until it wasn't. There was an unsettling silence, as if the forest had suddenly held its breath. Then, in the distance, came a low, mournful moan that seemed to float on the chill air. I told myself it was just the wind twisting through the branches, but deep down, I knew that no natural sound could carry such sorrow. The next morning, still groggy from a fitful sleep, I joined the others on a brief hike around the camp. The sun was hidden behind a thick veil of fog, and the trees, heavy with autumn decay, seemed to whisper secrets. It was then that Sam stopped abruptly in front of a towering oak. "Look at this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Etched into the bark were spirals and runic symbols, deeply incised as though by a practiced hand. I couldn't tell if they were natural patterns or something deliberately carved. Sam's eyes shone with a mixture of triumph and terror. She'd been searching for evidence of the old rites, and now, here it was, a clue that defied rational explanation. Later that afternoon, as we returned to the RV, Erin hesitated at the edge of the clearing. "Did you see that?" she asked, voice trembling. Before any of us could react, she pointed toward the dense line of trees. Through a gap in the mist, I caught a glimpse of a tall, gaunt figure standing motionless, its presence as fleeting as a shadow before disappearing into the gloom. Tyler laughed nervously, brushing it off as a trick of the light, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us. Our first night back at camp was thick with tension. The natural chorus of crickets and owls had been replaced by an eerie quiet that pressed in on all sides. I sat near the window of the RV, my eyes scanning the dark outlines of the forest, when suddenly the power went out. The interior was plunged into an oppressive darkness, and my heart raced as I fumbled for a flashlight. The RV's sensor alerts blinked furiously, a warning that our old vehicle was nearing a critical failure. Outside, the temperature had dropped sharply. I joined the others outside the door, and that's when we heard it again. A sound that was almost like a chorus of anguished moans intermingled with the low growl of an animal in distress. It wasn't any sound I'd ever heard before, and it set my nerves on edge. Sam's eyes widened, and Erin clutched my arm, her face etched with fear. Tyler tried to make light of the situation. "Probably just a pack of wolves, right?" he quipped, though his voice lacked conviction. I didn't reply. I only tightened my grip on the flashlight, feeling the weight of the forest's silent hostility. As the night deepened, things took a turn for the worse. The RV's power issues escalated to a full-blown blackout. In the inky blackness, I could feel a presence outside the vehicle, a heavy, deliberate movement that circled our makeshift camp. We huddled together on the floor of the RV, each sound amplified in the confined space. Then, there were the claw-like marks. I remember the sound of something scraping against the metal exterior of the RV, followed by the sickening sight of deep, ragged gouges on the side, as if a massive talon had been raking across it. Oh, in the midst of the chaos, our group's tensions boiled over. Tyler's earlier jibes gave way to panicked curses, and Sam, normally so calm, was frantic as she muttered about ancient curses and the Wendigo, a creature of insatiable hunger and corruption from indigenous lore, now twisted by local legend to haunt these very woods. "It's real, isn't it?" she asked, eyes darting wildly between us. "This isn't just a power failure. Something's here, and it's angry." I tried to assert control, my military training kicking in. "We need to get out of here," I said, voice steady despite the tremor of fear beneath it. "There's an old ranger station about a mile from here. We'll get there, secure the area, and figure out what we're dealing with." Erin nodded silently, though her eyes told a story of dread, and even Tyler's skeptical frown couldn't mask his unease. In the pitch black of that night, we abandoned the RV, leaving behind the flickering, unreliable shelter that had become our prison. With only the beam of a single flashlight and the weak glow of our phone screens, we made our way through the forest. Every snap of a twig and rustle of leaves sounded like the herald of impending doom. I could feel that thing out there, stalking us with the deliberate, predatory steps. Then, as if the night itself had conspired against us, the creature revealed itself. In a clearing shrouded by dense fog, I saw it clearly. A tall, gaunt figure with elongated limbs, eyes that smoldered like dying coals, and a presence that exuded raw, animalistic hunger. It was unlike any animal I'd seen, its features a grotesque distortion of human and beast. In that moment, every skeptical thought in Tyler's mind was obliterated by the undeniable reality of our situation. The creature lunged, and chaos erupted. Tyler, who had been trailing behind, was the first to suffer. A brutal swipe sent him crashing against a tree, a cry of pain echoing into the night. I managed to grab him as he fell, his face contorted in shock and agony. Erin screamed, her voice lost in the cacophony of the creature's feral snarls and our panicked shouts. "Keep moving," I barked, adrenaline surging as I hauled Tyler to his feet. Sam was frantically scanning the area, clutching a battered notebook filled with notes on local legends. "There!" she cried, pointing toward a dilapidated building half hidden by underbrush, a ranger station that might offer us refuge. We sprinted through the forest, guided by a mix of instinct and terror. The creature's presence was relentless, its guttural growls and snapping claws always just a few steps behind. I could feel its malice, as though it were not simply an animal, but a manifestation of ancient, vengeful hunger, a Wendigo reborn in the cold darkness of the woods. At the ranger station, we barricaded the door as best we could. The building, though abandoned and creaking with disuse, offered a semblance of safety. Inside, the dim light of our cell phones revealed dusty furniture, broken windows, and the remnants of a long-forgotten past. It was in this desperate moment that our disparate strengths had to coalesce. I took command, organizing a plan to secure the building and keep watch. Sam, trembling yet determined, began scribbling furiously in her notebook, muttering about the ancient symbols and rites that might repel the creature. "There's a ritual," she whispered, "an old indigenous prayer that might bind or at least hold it off." I wasn't sure if a prayer could stop a force of nature, but at that moment, hope was all we had. Tyler, clutching a makeshift splint around his injured arm, volunteered to distract the creature if it tried to breach the station. "I'm not exactly thrilled about playing decoy," he admitted in a strained voice, "but I'll do what I have to." Erin, though visibly terrified, kept her calm and watchful, her intuitive sense guiding us as she indicated which windows or doors might be vulnerable to an attack. For what felt like an eternity, we waited in breathless silence. Every minute stretched into an eternity of dread and uncertainty. Outside, the oppressive darkness and the occasional snap of branches were our only reminders that the creature was still out there, stalking its prey. I kept my flashlight trained on the door, every nerve on high alert. Then came the final assault. With a force that shattered the stillness, the creature pounded on the door, its heavy, guttural roars reverberating through the thin walls of the ranger station. The door splintered under the onslaught, and I could hear the scraping of claws against wood. In that critical moment, Sam began reciting an incantation from memory, a desperate invocation drawn from indigenous legends and ancient lore. "By the old ways, by the sacred symbols be gone, you spirit of hunger," she chanted, voice trembling yet resolute. I watched as Erin joined her in a quiet harmony, and even Tyler's pained groans formed a discordant chorus of defiance. The air in the room thickened, charged with a palpable energy that made my skin crawl. Outside, the creature howled, a sound that was as much a curse as it was a warning. I felt a strange shift in the atmosphere. The pounding on the door slowed, replaced by an eerie, almost mournful silence. In that suspended moment, it was as if the creature was caught between worlds. A predator held in a tenuous balance between our defiant ritual and its insatiable hunger. I didn't know if the ancient words had any power, but I clung to the hope that they might at least hold it at bay long enough for us to escape. The respite was brief. With a sudden, bone-chilling snarl, the creature broke through a weakened section of the wall. A violent struggle ensued. I threw myself in front of Tyler as the beast surged into the room, its twisted limbs lashing out. In the ensuing chaos, we fought with everything we had. Chairs thrown aside, desperate shouts, and the overwhelming realization that our lives were hanging by a thread. I remember the impact of the creature's claw as it raked across my shoulder, pain searing through me, but I managed to shove it aside long enough for Tyler to stumble back. Sam's incantation grew louder, desperate words echoing off the walls as Erin and I held the creature at bay with makeshift weapons. a heavy metal pipe, and a broken piece of wood. For every moment that stretched into agony, I felt the ancient power of the ritual surge through the room, repelling the creature's relentless assault. After what seemed like hours of terror condensed into a single hellish night, the creature finally recoiled. It hissed and retreated into the darkness, leaving behind a shattered station, injured bodies, and a silence that was both a relief and a promise of future danger. We collapsed together in exhausted relief, the adrenaline slowly giving way to a heavy, unspoken grief. Tyler's arm throbbed painfully, and I could see the shock etched on his face. A stark reminder that the creature was not merely a spectral presence, but a lethal force that had nearly claimed our lives. In the hours that followed, as dawn's weak light filtered through the broken windows, we gathered our wounded pride and made our way back to the remnants of our RV. The forest, now bathed in a cold, unforgiving light, seemed to hold its secrets close. We left that cursed clearing behind, our escape marked not by triumph, but by a lingering, profound sense of loss and terror. In the days that followed, we sought answers. I spent sleepless nights replaying every detail in my mind, trying to understand the inexplicable blend of folklore and raw, violent reality we'd encountered. Sam immersed herself even deeper into her research, desperate to uncover any historical accounts that might explain the presence we had disturbed. Tyler, once a derisive skeptic, now bore the scars of our ordeal, both physical and emotional, his humor replaced by a quiet, haunted reserve. And Erin became a ghost of herself, her sensitivity now a constant reminder of the things that lurk just beyond the veil of our understanding. Even now, as I write these words, I can't help but feel that the forest has not relinquished its hold on us. The incident left scars that time cannot easily heal. Our brush with that Wendigo-like creature, a force of ancient, insatiable hunger, revealed a dark truth. Some legends are born of an ancient, dangerous reality that defies explanation. The woods of Shawnee National Forest still whisper their secrets on cold autumn nights, and I know deep in my bones that the creature is still out there, waiting for another chance to emerge from the shadows. I've long since abandoned that RV, and I rarely venture into remote backwoods now. But sometimes, when the night is quiet and the wind carries a mournful tone, I catch myself wondering if I'll ever truly be free of the forest's grasp. For now, all I have are the memories, the echoes of a night when ancient hunger met modern man, and a grim understanding that some places are best left undisturbed. My name is Michael Reynolds. I'm 40 years old, and this happened in early winter at Giant City State Park in southern Illinois. I had come here seeking solace. After years of living with a heavy heart and a nagging guilt that no amount of time in the city could ease, I decided to retreat into the quiet isolation of nature. My aging RV, a battered but reliable companion, was to be my sanctuary, a place where I could escape my past and perhaps face it head-on in the silence of the wilderness. The day I arrived, a low, gray sky hung over the rugged sandstone outcrops and dense, frost-tipped pines of Giant City State Park. The early winter chill seeped into my bones as I parked the RV on a small, secluded clearing near a cluster of unusual rock formations. The beauty of the landscape was both haunting and serene. The rocks bore ancient scars, carved by time and the elements, and the quiet was absolute, except for the occasional gust of wind that whispered through the trees. At first, the isolation was comforting. I spent the day unpacking, setting up a modest camp, and taking a slow, solitary walk along a well-worn path. My thoughts were mine alone, and I welcomed the space to reflect on the mistakes and losses of my past. But as dusk fell, I began to notice subtle, unsettling signs that I was not as alone as I had thought. That first night in the RV, as I lay in the narrow bed beneath a threadbare blanket, I heard something that made me sit bolt upright. There was a gentle tapping on the window, a soft, irregular rapping that could have been the branch of a tree swaying in the wind. Yet, when I peered out into the darkness, I saw nothing but the impenetrable blackness of the forest. The sound resumed, and this time it was accompanied by what felt like a faint, sorrowful whisper, barely audible over my own ragged breathing. I tried to dismiss it as the wind playing tricks on my mind, but an unexplainable chill crept over me that night, as if unseen eyes were watching from beyond the glass. The next morning, determined to shake off my unease, I set out on a hike among the sandstone formations. The ground was dusted with frost, and the low sun cast long, slanting shadows that made the rugged terrain look like a landscape from another era. As I wandered along a narrow trail, I noticed strange carvings on one of the larger rock faces, swirling patterns and cryptic symbols that seemed deliberately etched into the stone. My pulse quickened as I knelt to examine them. The markings were weathered but unmistakably human in origin, hinting at an ancient ritual or a long-forgotten tale. A short distance away, nestled in a crevice behind a fallen boulder near an abandoned homestead, I discovered a bundle of yellowed papers sealed in a rusted tin box. The letters and diary entries inside were written in spidery cursive, telling the tragic story of Lillian Hart, a young woman whose life had been snuffed out in a brutal, unjust manner during the early days of settlement. According to the journal, Lillian had been a gentle soul, wronged and ultimately murdered by members of a prominent pioneering family, a crime that had never been fully atoned for. As I read, a cold knot of dread and guilt formed in my stomach. The details were heart-wrenching, and an almost instinctive sense of connection tugged at me as I absorbed each line of the sorrowful narrative. In the following days, I found that the landscape was beginning to echo the grief and injustice Lillian had suffered. I began to see fleeting images. A pale, sorrowful face reflected in a shard of broken glass on the RV window, or in the rippling surface of a nearby stream. At first, I thought it was merely the play of light and my imagination. But as the hours wore on, the visions became too vivid to ignore. In one instance, while I was preparing a meager meal in the cramped kitchenette of the RV, I glimpsed the figure of a woman standing just beyond the door. A translucent presence, her eyes deep pools of despair, watching me silently before vanishing as soon as I turned. Sleep eluded me. Each night I was haunted by the soft, almost imperceptible footsteps outside, by the echo of whispers that seemed to call my name in the language I couldn't understand. The isolation that once promised comfort now felt like a prison, one whose walls were built not only of stone and pine but of the sins of the past. Driven by a mix of fear and an inexplicable need for redemption, I began to piece together the fragments of Lillian's story from the letters. It wasn't long before I realized that her tragedy was more than just an isolated act of cruelty. It was interwoven with my own history. The diary hinted at connections to a family of settlers whose legacy I now understood with a jolt of horror I carried in my blood. I had always known my lineage was not without its dark corners, but the revelation that my ancestors might have been complicit in Lillian's untimely death was a burden too heavy to bear. I felt as though I were staring into a mirror that reflected not only my guilt, but the collective guilt of generations. Late one foggy evening, as I sat huddled on the RV's porch, I felt the temperature drop precipitously. A dense mist rolled in from the forest, swallowing the outlines of trees and turning the world into a monochrome dreamscape. I tried to focus on the journal in my hands, but my eyes kept straying to the darkness beyond. Then, as if summoned by my inner torment, she appeared fully, a luminous, ghostly figure standing at the edge of the clearing. Lillian, her form ethereal and mournful, regarded me with eyes that seemed to plead for justice, for acknowledgement of the pain inflicted upon her. My heart pounded in my chest, and for a moment I was frozen in terror and awe. The air around her was heavy with sorrow, and I could almost feel the weight of her anguish pressing against my soul. In that silent confrontation, the ghost of Lillian did not speak with words, but her presence was a powerful indictment of the past, a mirror held up to my own failings and the sins of those who came before me. I knew then that I could no longer hide from the legacy that had haunted me for so long. With trembling hands, I gathered the remnants of Lillian's story, the fragile papers and diary, and resolved to make amends in the only way I knew how. Over the next several days, I spent every spare moment researching the history of the land, delving into county records and local lore, trying to piece together a narrative that could perhaps bring some measure of justice to the wronged soul. I walked to the paths where Lillian had once wandered, tracing the steps of those who had come before me, and in quiet moments of reflection, I whispered apologies into the wind. The climax of my journey came on a night when the mist was so thick it seemed to muffle all sound. I found myself at a secluded outcrop where, according to the journal, Lillian had met her tragic end. The rocks here were ancient, their surfaces etched with the scars of time and sorrow. Kneeling before the stones, I pulled from my pocket a small tarnished locket, a family heirloom that had been passed down through generations, an heirloom I had always resented for its reminder of a lineage I wished to forget. But in that moment, I understood that it was also a key, a symbol of both guilt and the possibility of redemption. With a heavy heart, I opened the locket and recited an apology that came from the deepest corners of my soul, acknowledging not only the sins of my ancestors, but my own complicity in the silence that had allowed them to persist. I placed the locket gently among the rocks and arranged some wildflowers I had gathered, creating a small, humble memorial for Lillian. The night was silent, save for the soft rustling of the trees, as if the forest itself was listening. For a long, breathless moment, I waited. The air felt charged with expectation, and then, almost imperceptibly, the oppressive weight of the past began to lift. The spectral figure of Lillian appeared one last time, a gentle nod, a look of bittersweet relief in her eyes, before she slowly faded into the darkness, leaving behind a quiet stillness that was both mournful and hopeful. In the days that followed, I found that the haunting presence had receded. The RV, once filled with eerie whispers and ghostly apparitions, became merely a shelter once more. Yet, the memory of that encounter and the burden of the history it revealed remained with me. I realized that some ghosts are not merely figments of a restless mind, but echoes of real, unresolved pain that persist across generations. Lillian's spirit and the legacy of injustice that had bound her to this land would forever be a part of me. A reminder that the past is never truly past. As I packed up my RV and prepared to leave Giant City State Park, I felt a quiet resolve settle over me. I had faced the shadows of my ancestry and, in doing so, had taken the first steps toward forgiveness, both for Lillian and for myself. I drove away with a heavy heart and a cautious hope that, while the scars of the past might never fully disappear, acknowledging them was the only path to healing. Even now, when I find myself alone in a quiet room, I sometimes catch a glimpse of a pale face in a reflective surface, or hear a soft whisper carried on the wind. And I know that Lillian's story, and the stories of all those who have suffered in silence, continue to echo through the corridors of time. My journey did not erase the past, but it did transform it, turning a legacy of guilt into a promise of atonement, a promise that I must keep for as long as I walk this earth. My name is Christopher Walker. I'm 38 years old, and this happened on a sweltering late summer weekend at Kankakee River State Park in Illinois. I had been a freelance photographer and journalist for as long as I could remember, but after a series of personal setbacks, a failed relationship, the loss of a close friend, and a creative block that had left my portfolio barren, I needed to escape. I craved solitude in the hope that nature's quiet might help me rediscover my vision. So I loaded my modest, aging RV with my camera gear, notebooks, and enough supplies for a week, and headed for a remote spot along the Kankakee River. The RV's engine coughed to life as I navigated winding back roads flanked by towering pines and sprawling fields. I arrived late in the afternoon at a secluded clearing on the river's edge. The site was isolated, a small patch of land bordered by dense forest on one side and the gentle flow of the river on the other. I pitched my temporary home with a mix of relief and anticipation. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and wild pine, and despite the heat of the day, a coolness seemed to seep into my bones as dusk fell. The first night was quiet. Too quiet. I had planned to spend the evening capturing the twilight and testing new long exposure techniques, but as darkness enveloped the clearing, I began to notice oddities. I remember sitting on the worn steps of the RV, scrolling through some photos on my camera, when a distant howl shattered the stillness. It was not the familiar cry of a coyote, but something deeper and more resonant, echoing off the treetops. I chalked it up to local wildlife at first, but an uneasy feeling crept in as the sound repeated, punctuating the silence of the night. Over the next couple of days, my initial enthusiasm was gradually replaced by a creeping anxiety. My photography sessions became interspersed with moments when I'd catch a glimpse of movement at the edge of my vision. A flash of black between the trees, too large and deliberate to be a mere animal. One evening, as I was reviewing my shots on the camera's display, I noticed something peculiar. A dark, almost featureless shape lurking in the background of several images. At first, I assumed it was a trick of the light or a smudge on the lens, but when I zoomed in, I saw what looked like the glint of fiery eyes. Equipment began to act up too. My camera's memory card would occasionally glitch, erasing parts of my latest images, as if something, or someone, was tampering with my work. The RV's battery, which had always been a bit temperamental, started to flicker ominously during the night, and my portable radio, usually a comforting source of static-filled background noise, emitted a series of distorted warnings that I couldn't decipher. I tried to dismiss these as mere coincidences, the result of old gear and a stressed mind, but a persistent dread lingered. One evening, while I was out by the river attempting to capture the reflection of the sunset, I overheard a snippet on my car radio that made my blood run cold. A local news update mentioned sightings of a black dog near the park, a creature described in local lore as a spectral hellhound that appears under the full moon. The report claimed that witnesses had seen a massive, jet-black dog with eyes that burned like embers, roaming the periphery of the wilderness and leaving behind scorch marks on the earth. The story was dismissed by many as folklore, yet here I was, alone with inexplicable photographs and equipment acting up as if warning me. I began researching the legend in earnest. Late one night, under the weak glow of a desk lamp in the cramped interior of my RV, I pored over archived articles and local history pamphlets. The legend of the black dog was older than I had imagined, traced back to early settlers, and even referenced in Native American stories of a guardian spirit cursed to roam the land, punishing those who strayed too far or disturbed the sacred balance of nature. According to these accounts, The creature was not merely a mindless beast. It was a spectral enforcer, a warning embodied in fur and fangs. With every piece of research, the feeling that I was being watched grew stronger. I began to experience moments of disorientation, a chill along my neck when I was alone, the sensation of being followed, even when I was sure I was alone in the RV. At times, I would catch a glimpse of a dark, canine silhouette between the trees. Once, while reviewing my photographs at dawn, I noticed a set of large, clawed paw prints pressed into the soft mud just outside my RV. They were too deep, too deliberate to be made by any common animal. As the full moon rose on the third night of my stay, the oppressive weight of isolation and fear came to a head. I had been planning a night shoot by the river, determined to capture the interplay of moonlight and water. The cool night air was crisp, and the moon hung low, casting eerie, elongated shadows across the clearing. I set up my camera on a tripod and began framing the shot, completely absorbed in the quiet artistry of the scene. Then I heard it, a low, guttural growl, almost inaudible at first, but steadily growing in intensity. I froze, the hairs on my arms prickling with alarm. The sound was unlike anything I'd heard before, a deep rumble that vibrated through the ground. I peered into the darkness, and that's when I saw it. A massive, jet-black dog standing at the tree line, its eyes glowing with an unnatural, ember-like light. The creature's gaze locked onto mine, and in that frozen moment, every instinct in me screamed to run. I snapped several frantic photos, my hands trembling so badly that I could barely hold the camera steady. The creature did not immediately advance, but it began to circle slowly, as if assessing me, the intruder in its domain. The air turned colder still, and a palpable sense of menace filled the space between us. I retreated to the RV, heart pounding, unsure if what I'd just seen was real or the product of a fraying mind. For the next several hours, I barricaded myself inside the RV, checking every window and door. The radio continued to emit garbled static punctuated by that same low, ominous growl. My heart pounded as I listened, waiting for the inevitable moment when the creature might breach my temporary sanctuary. I felt utterly alone, vulnerable in a space that was supposed to be safe. At dawn, with the first light barely pushing back the shadows, I emerged to inspect the damage. On the side of the RV, deep gouges marred the metal, a series of claw marks that looked almost deliberate, as if the creature had tried to tear through my only means of escape. My mind raced as I tried to rationalize the experience. Was it merely a large stray dog, crazed by hunger or disease? But nothing about the creature I saw matched any ordinary animal. Its eyes, its size, the almost supernatural aura it exuded, all pointed to something far more terrifying. I spent that day in a haze of anxiety and relentless photography, trying to capture any evidence of the creature's presence. I roamed the perimeter of the campsite, collecting every strange footprint and scratch on the ground. I even set up my camera on a timer near a particularly dense patch of pines, hoping to catch the creature on film. Hours later, when I reviewed the shots, I was greeted by an image that sent shivers down my spine. A blurred, spectral form in the distance, indistinguishable from a shadow yet undeniably there. Desperation led me to attempt contact with local park rangers. I made a call to the ranger station, but the operator's voice was guarded, almost reluctant to discuss the sightings. They explained that, while there had been occasional reports of an unusual black dog, nothing conclusive had ever been recorded. They urged me to be cautious, but their tone was more dismissive than helpful. I left the conversation feeling more isolated than ever. That night, with the full moon high and the sky a vast, starless dome, the terror reached its climax. I sat by the window of the RV, watching as the shadows danced in the periphery. Then I heard it again, a series of deep, resonant barks that seemed to come from all directions. The creature's howls echoed across the clearing, mingling with the rustling of the trees and the distant rush of the river. I felt compelled to look outside, my curiosity overcoming my dread. When I finally mustered the courage to step out, the sight that met my eyes was like something out of a nightmare. There, in the moonlit clearing, was the hellhound in its full, ghastly form. A colossal dog, its coat an inky void, eyes ablaze with an inner fire that flickered like dying embers. It paced deliberately, its head tilted as if listening to some silent command. I stood frozen, caught between the impulse to flee and the morbid fascination of witnessing such raw, supernatural power. My rational mind screamed that this was impossible, a trick of the light, a hallucination born of isolation and stress, yet every instinct told me that the creature was real and that I was in grave danger. I retreated back to the RV, fumbling with the locks, as the beast's low growl vibrated through the ground. Once inside, I bolted every window and door, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. I decided then that I couldn't wait for the creature to decide its next move. I would try to leave, drive the RV and escape the cursed clearing. I grabbed my keys, my camera still clutched tightly in one hand, and slipped out of the back door. The cool night air hit me like a shock as I made my way to the RV. Outside, I glimpsed the creature again, now standing at the edge of the clearing. Its eyes fixed on me with an intensity that chilled my soul. I started the RV's engine with trembling fingers, the old machine protesting as I eased it into gear. The headlights cut through the darkness as I drove slowly, the road ahead winding through towering pines and thick underbrush. But no matter how far I went, I could sense that the creature was still following, appearing at unexpected turns, a dark silhouette against the forest backdrop. Every time I glanced in the rearview mirror, there was that unmistakable glint of burning eyes. A surreal terror gripped me as I pressed on, the RV's engine straining under the pressure of my desperate escape. I took sharp turns, trying to lose whatever shadow was tailing me, but the creature's presence persisted. At one point, I pulled over on a narrow shoulder beside the river, intending to catch my breath and regroup. There, just beyond the RV's headlights, I saw it clearly. The hellhound, its massive form illuminated by the pale light of the moon, standing motionless on the bank. For a long, agonizing moment, time seemed to freeze as we stared at each other across the void of fear. I knew then that I couldn't run forever. The creature was not just a stray animal driven by instinct. It was something otherworldly, an emissary of a curse older than the park itself. With adrenaline surging and terror fueling my every move, I resolved to drive until I could find safety, a ranger station or any sign of civilization. I pushed the RV to its limits, heart pounding in sync with the rhythmic thumping of the engine. Hours later, I saw the dim outline of a small roadside diner and gas station in the distance. Relief and exhaustion warred within me as I pulled in, leaving the dark, haunted road behind. Later, in the sterile light of that all-too-modern refuge, I tried to make sense of everything. I reviewed the photos on my camera, each image a testament to a nightmarish encounter that defied logic and reason. The evidence was there. A blurred shape, the unmistakable reflection of eyes ablaze in the dark. I knew that I had experienced something beyond the realm of explanation, something that blurred the line between myth and reality. I still write about that night. The terror, the isolation, the chase through the darkened woods. It transformed me, forcing me to confront the fragile boundary between what we know and what we cannot explain. I eventually returned to my work with renewed passion, my photographs now infused with a raw, haunting beauty that spoke of darkness and light, fear and hope. Yet, even as I share my story and the images I captured, I cannot shake the memory of those blazing eyes in the dark, nor the relentless presence of that spectral hellhound. Some nights, when the wind howls just right and shadows dance at the edge of my vision, I remember that terror on the deserted road. And I wonder if the creature still roams those ancient pines, a guardian of secrets too terrible for the light of day, a reminder that sometimes the things we dismiss as mere legend are all too real, waiting silently in the darkness for someone to cross into their domain. My name is Alex Rivera. I'm 45 years old, and this happened on a humid late summer weekend on the outskirts of Enfield, Illinois. I used to be a journalist with a reputation for uncovering the truth behind local legends and mysteries. After a string of disillusioning assignments and personal setbacks, I turned to investigative cryptozoology in search of something real that could reignite my passion, and maybe even redeem me in some small way. When I heard the local whispers about the Enfield horror, a strange, three-legged creature said to haunt the nearby marshlands, I knew I had to see it for myself. I loaded my aging RV with my essential gear, cameras, audio recorders, notebooks, and enough supplies for a week in isolation. The drive into the outskirts of Enfield was a slow descent into a world where nature reigned supreme. Dense woods and murky marshes edged the quiet town, their presence felt in the humid air and the shifting mist that clung to every surface. I parked my RV in a secluded clearing beside the marsh, its waterlogged banks overgrown with wild reeds and moss. Even under the glare of a fading sun, the place exuded an unsettling energy, a quiet warning that not everything here was meant for human eyes. The first night, I set up my temporary command center inside the cramped RV. I arranged my cameras on makeshift tripods around the perimeter of the clearing, aiming to capture any unusual movement in the murky darkness. The air inside was thick with anticipation, mixed with the persistent hum of cicadas and the distant croak of unseen creatures. As I settled into a restless sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I was awakened sometime past midnight by a low, rhythmic vibration that seemed to emanate from the very walls of the RV. At first, I dismissed it as the old engine settling into the cooling night air, but then came a series of inexplicable malfunctions. My digital recorder's screen flickered erratically, and my camera's battery meter dipped and surged as if drained by some invisible force. Worse still, I discovered muddy tracks encircling the RV when I stepped outside to check on a wayward piece of equipment. The prints were oddly shaped, uneven and smeared, as though made by a creature with an unconventional gait. The next day, I spent hours reviewing the footage from the previous night. In several shots, at the very edge of my field of vision, a blurry silhouette emerged, a shape that moved with a peculiar, three-legged rhythm. I paused frame by frame, heart pounding, as I attempted to discern any detail. In one image, I caught a glimpse of what might have been luminous eyes, reflecting an otherworldly light. Rational explanations were elusive. Perhaps it was just a trick of light on the wet ground or a flaw in the camera's sensor. Yet, the evidence was growing increasingly difficult to ignore. Over the next couple of days, the atmosphere around the RV grew thicker with tension. Electronic devices continued to malfunction inexplicably, recorders shutting off mid-playback, cameras refusing to store images despite ample memory, and the radio sporadically emitting bursts of static interspersed with a low, pulsing sound. Late one afternoon, I received an anonymous text message on my cell phone. "Leave the enigma alone. Respect what lies hidden in the marsh." The message was brief, the sender unknown. At the same time, a series of cryptic phone calls from a withheld number left a similar impression. The warnings only fueled my resolve to document the truth. That evening, while reviewing the latest footage inside the dim light of the RV, I was startled by the sound of heavy, labored breathing mixed with the splashing of water just beyond the awning. My pulse raced as I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside. In the darkness, I scanned the perimeter of the clearing. There, for a fleeting moment, I saw a pair of bright, almost hypnotic eyes peering from behind a clump of reeds, before the creature melted away into the night. I couldn't tell if it had been a trick of my imagination or something far more real. The following morning brought more unsettling evidence. I discovered deep scratch marks along the side of the RV, almost as if something had attempted to claw its way inside. A portion of the awning was torn, its fabric shredded by what looked like enormous, wet paws. I followed a trail of slick, muddy footprints that led directly into the marsh, their edges soft and indistinct, as if the creature had waded through water before treading on land. Near the base of a large, gnarled tree, I found bizarre, semi-organic symbols crudely etched into the bark and the surrounding marsh grass. The markings were not random. They appeared to form a pattern, an ancient language of the wild, and they sent a chill down my spine. Despite the mounting evidence and the growing terror within me, I couldn't shake the need to document this phenomenon. I set up additional cameras and even a discreet audio recorder near the edge of the marsh, determined to capture definitive evidence of the Enfield horror. Every night, I sat in the RV's cramped interior, eyes glued to the monitors, waiting for the creature to make its move. Then came the night of the torrential downpour. The sky opened up with a fury, unleashing sheets of rain that turned the marsh into a churning, muddy nightmare. I huddled in the RV, watching the storm lash against the windows, when I heard it. A series of deep, resonant barks that reverberated through the downpour. At first, they were distant, almost swallowed by the roar of the rain, but then they grew louder, more insistent. The sound was not that of any ordinary dog. Compelled by a mixture of dread and determination, I grabbed my camera and stepped outside into the deluge. The rain obscured my vision, and the mist turned the familiar clearing into a surreal, shifting maze of darkness and shadow. I moved cautiously toward the source of the sound, my flashlight barely cutting through the murk. There, at the edge of the marsh, I caught sight of it. A small, three-legged creature standing motionless on a patch of muddy ground. Its skeletal frame was barely visible beneath the clinging rain, but its eyes, those eerie, luminous eyes, glowed like embers in the storm. My heart hammered in my chest as I slowly advanced, trying to capture the creature on film without startling it. For several agonizing minutes, it simply stared, as if assessing me, its presence both mesmerizing and menacing. Then, without warning, it bolted. The creature darted into the dense underbrush, its gait uneven yet purposeful. I followed, adrenaline pushing me forward as I trailed it into the heart of the marsh. Navigating the waterlogged terrain was treacherous. The ground squelched underfoot, and thick, tangled reeds whipped against my legs. I could hear the creature's rapid, irregular steps ahead, a staccato rhythm that sent pulses of fear racing through me. Eventually, I emerged into a hidden clearing, where the rain subsided enough to reveal a small cluster of egg-like structures nestled in the mud. They were arranged in a loose circle, almost reverently, as if they were being guarded by some unseen force, and there, standing protectively over them, was the creature in full defensive mode. In that charged moment, I realized the creature's behavior was not merely predatory, it was territorial, driven by a need to safeguard what it held dear. Panic and scientific curiosity warred within me. I raised my camera, desperate to document this unprecedented encounter, even as the creature's low growl reverberated through the clearing. Suddenly, it lunged. The ensuing struggle was chaotic, a frantic scramble amid the swirling rain and mud. I swung wildly, trying to ward it off while simultaneously recording every detail. I remember feeling a sharp pain as the creature's claws scraped against my forearm, and the sound of tearing fabric as my jacket was snagged on something jagged in the underbrush. In the melee, time seemed to distort. I managed to tear away, stumbling back toward the relative shelter of the RV with my camera still rolling. My breaths came in ragged gasps as I bolted the door and collapsed against it, listening to the angry, frustrated barks and splashes of water receding into the distance. I didn't know whether to feel relieved or overwhelmed by the raw, primal encounter I'd just experienced. Inside the RV, I tended to my wound as best as I could with a small first aid kit, my hands trembling. When the storm finally began to ease, I reviewed the footage on my camera. The images were chaotic, blurry, half corrupted by the torrential downpour, but among the flickering frames I could see undeniable evidence of that three-legged creature. Its luminous eyes piercing the darkness, its strange, fluid movements both mesmerizing and terrifying. The footage was ambiguous enough to fuel endless debate, yet real enough to challenge my long-held skepticism. In the aftermath, I spent the following hours in a daze of introspection. I sat in the silence of the now still marsh, the images of the creature and the fragile egg-like clusters etched into my memory. What had I witnessed? Was the Enfield horror simply a product of environmental mutation? A relic of a long-forgotten species forced into abnormality by nature's relentless pressures? Or was it something else? A spectral guardian of the marsh? A living embodiment of nature's wrath against human intrusion? The questions tormented me. With my equipment battered, my body bruised, and my spirit profoundly shaken, I made the decision to pack up and leave. As I drove my RV away from that eerie clearing, the images of the creature, its strange protective behavior, its luminous accusing eyes, lingered in my mind. The journey back was a blur of winding roads and introspective silence. I couldn't help but feel that my encounter had changed me. The Enfield horror was not merely a monster to be hunted or disproven. It was a mystery that defied easy categorization. A reminder that the natural world still held secrets far beyond the reach of modern science. In the days that followed, as I reviewed my notes and the surviving footage, I realized that my pursuit of the truth had led me to confront not only an elusive creature, but also the limits of human understanding. I had sought definitive proof to rekindle my passion for investigative journalism, yet what I found instead was a deep, unanswerable mystery, one that left me with more questions than answers. Leaving Enfield, I carried with me the weight of the unknown and a newfound respect for the delicate balance of nature. The Enfield horror, whether born of mutation, a remnant of an ancient lineage, or the spectral guardian of these sacred marshes, remained an enigma that defied rational explanation. Its brief, violent confrontation had shattered my old notions of certainty and forced me to accept that some mysteries are meant to be respected, if not fully understood. Even now, whenever I find myself alone in the quiet of night, I sometimes catch a glimpse of movement at the edge of my vision, or hear a low rhythmic vibration that sends shivers down my spine. And I wonder, does the Enfield horror still patrol those ancient marshes, watching over its secret domain, waiting for the next unwary intruder? I may never know, but one thing is certain. My encounter in the humid darkness near Enfield has left an indelible mark on my soul, a reminder that in the shadowed corners of our world, the line between myth and reality is perilously thin. My name is Marcus Finch. I'm 34 years old, and this happened at Illinois Beach State Park during a late spring escape when the dunes and the restless waters of Lake Michigan seemed to whisper secrets only the night could hold. I had once thrived as a photographer, capturing the ephemeral beauty of nature and human emotion. But after the sudden loss of someone I dearly loved, and the crushing guilt that followed, I retreated from the world of art and recognition. My camera, once my closest confidant, now gathered dust. Desperate to reclaim a spark of creativity and to face the inner demons that haunted me, I decided to take refuge in isolation. I loaded my aging RV with a few personal belongings, my battered camera, and a modest supply of gear, hoping that the serene landscapes and the sound of crashing waves might offer me solace or even redemption. I arrived at a secluded clearing near the park's dunes, not far from an abandoned boathouse that jutted forlornly toward the water's edge. The RV's presence among wildflowers and weathered sand dunes was almost surreal, a temporary home in a place where nature reigned supreme. That first evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky with hues of gold and violet, I set up my equipment and prepared to review some old nature photographs on my laptop. I hoped that reconnecting with my old work might awaken something in me that had long lain dormant. Sitting by the RV's window, I scrolled through images of sunlit dunes and rippling water. But as I paused on a shot of the twilight sky, I noticed something odd in the reflection beyond the glass. A flicker, a shadow that did not belong. At first, I convinced myself it was nothing more than a trick of light or the result of my tired eyes. Yet, for a brief, disquieting moment, the face reflected back at me was not entirely my own. The contours were the same, but there was a subtle distortion. A delayed smile, a fleeting expression of malice that vanished as quickly as it appeared. I shivered and told myself that stress and loneliness often played tricks on the mind. The following day, determined to clear my head, I set out along the shoreline. The park was alive with the gentle murmur of waves, the rustle of wind through tall grasses, and the scent of salt mixed with the damp earth. Wandering along a narrow path that hugged the dunes, I found myself drawn to an old, decrepit boathouse that had long been abandoned. Its wooden walls were weathered, and ivy clawed its way over the structure. Inside, amidst broken furniture and scattered debris, something caught my eye. A large, ornate mirror leaning against a crumbling wall. The mirror was striking. Its frame was intricately carved with swirling patterns and somber motifs that evoked both beauty and sorrow. There was an almost magnetic pull about it, a silent invitation I couldn't resist. Locally, I'd heard faint whispers of a curse surrounding that very mirror, of misfortune befalling anyone who dared disturb it, but my curiosity overcame my wariness. I carefully pried the mirror away from its resting place, wrapped it in an old blanket I had in the RV, and carried it back to my temporary sanctuary. After returning to the RV, I placed the mirror in a corner of the small living area, thinking it might make an interesting subject for a few experimental shots. I set up my camera and lit a single lamp, then sat before it, half in fascination and half in trepidation. At first, nothing seemed amiss. The reflection was perfectly ordinary. But as the evening deepened and shadows stretched long, I began to notice subtle discrepancies. When I moved my hand, the mirror's reflection lagged ever so slightly behind, as if it were struggling to keep pace with my actions. At other times, when I leaned forward to study my face, I caught a glimpse of a darker, distorted expression, a twist of my features that was not my own. I tried to dismiss these anomalies as mere quirks of an old mirror or the play of poor lighting, but a nagging unease set in. Later that night, as I lay in the narrow bed of the RV, I found myself unable to sleep. In the silence, I kept thinking about the mirror's odd behavior. I convinced myself that it was nothing more than a faulty reflection, but deep down, I feared that it was showing me something I wasn't ready to confront, something dark lurking within. Over the next couple of days, the disturbances grew more insistent. Every time I passed a reflective surface, the gleam of the RV's metal door, the still surface of a puddle after a brief summer rain, I saw not just my own reflection, but a second image that seemed to follow my movements with a subtle difference. It wasn't until one particularly quiet evening, when I was reviewing some new shots on my camera, that I truly realized I wasn't imagining things. There, in the corner of one photograph, was a shadowy figure that looked disturbingly like me, yet its eyes held a glimmer of malice and despair. The image was blurred, almost as if the figure were reaching out from a parallel world. At first, I chalked these occurrences up to the trauma of my recent loss. The grief had clouded my judgment, and my mind was playing tricks on me. But then the whispering started. In the quiet of the night, when the wind moaned outside and the only light came from the flickering lamp in the RV, I began to hear soft, insidious voices. They were barely audible, like a sigh escaping from deep within, and they echoed words I recognized as my own self-doubt and guilt. It was as if the mirror had become a portal for my innermost insecurities, projecting them back at me in a form I could not ignore. I spent my days trying to document these unsettling phenomena. I took countless photographs, adjusted my camera settings, and even recorded audio in hopes of capturing the whispered voices. Every time I reviewed the evidence, my heart pounded with a mixture of fear and reluctant fascination. The mirror's reflection was no longer a passive observer. It began to assert itself. I noticed objects in the RV shifting positions overnight. A mug moved from the table to the floor, a book left open on a different page. Cold drafts swept through the small space, though every window and door was closed tight. It was as if a presence had permeated my sanctuary, a presence that was both a part of me and yet entirely alien. My rational mind battled with the rising tide of dread. I had always prided myself on my skepticism, on my ability to see through superstitions and baseless fears. But now, every reflective surface became a potential mirror into a darker reality. A reality where the person I saw was not wholly me. The doppelganger in the mirror began to speak in a voice that was a twisted echo of my own. At times, it whispered fragments of my deepest insecurities, reminding me of failures, losses, and the burden of guilt I had carried since that tragic day. Other times it simply stared, its eyes dark and accusing, as if daring me to acknowledge the parts of myself I had long tried to bury. Then came the stormy night. The sky had darkened into a tumult of swirling clouds, and thunder rumbled in the distance as rain lashed against the RV. I huddled in a corner, staring at the mirror with a mix of terror and determination. Lightning flashed, briefly illuminating the room in stark, unnatural light. In those fleeting moments, the mirror's surface seemed to ripple and shudder, and I swear I saw my corrupted doppelganger step out from behind the glass. It was not a separate being, but an extension of myself, yet twisted, malformed, and imbued with an intensity of despair that I had never known. In that moment, as the wind howled and the rain drummed a relentless beat on the roof, I felt an overwhelming compulsion to confront what I had been avoiding for so long. I rose unsteadily, my heart hammering in my chest, and moved toward the mirror. The room seemed to close in around me, every reflection in the dark surfaces of the RV now echoing that same tormented visage. The doppelganger's eyes met mine in the mirror, and for a long, agonizing minute we stared at each other. It was as if the mirror had become a battleground for the war raging within me, the war between self-destruction and the desperate desire for redemption. Tears blurred my vision as I wrestled with the overwhelming urge to break free from the prison of my own guilt. In that charged silence, I made a decision. I would shatter the mirror and, with it, confront the dark reflection that had haunted me. Gripping a heavy metal tool from a makeshift toolkit, I raised it with trembling hands. The reflection in the mirror contorted, as if in silent protest, and then there was a deafening crash as I brought the tool down upon the glass. The sound of shattering glass filled the RV, each splintering fragment reflecting 1,000 broken images of myself. For a brief, surreal moment, time seemed to stop. I stared, numb, at the scattered pieces on the floor, each shard a jagged echo of my internal torment. The oppressive presence that had filled the room seemed to waver, its hold loosening as the mirror's surface was obliterated. Yet, even as I felt a flicker of hope, a lingering terror whispered that what I had done might only be a temporary reprieve. In the aftermath of that violent act, I sat amidst the ruins, shivering in the storm's aftermath and grappling with a profound uncertainty. Had I truly banished the malevolent reflection, or had I only silenced it for a time? I spent the rest of that night in restless agitation, the sound of rain mingling with the distant echoes of my own heartbeat. The oppressive feeling slowly began to lift as the storm subsided, but I was left with a deep, gnawing question. Was the doppelganger merely a manifestation of my own guilt, or had it taken on a life of its own? A dark echo that would forever be a part of me. In the quiet hours of the morning, as the first light crept over the dunes and the storm clouds parted to reveal a pale, uncertain sky, I gathered what remained of the shattered mirror. The fragments lay scattered like pieces of a broken identity across the worn floor of the RV. I knew I would have to leave Illinois Beach State Park, to drive away from the place that had forced me to confront the darkest parts of my soul. With a heavy heart and a mind still reeling from the confrontation, I packed my gear, loaded my battered camera and notebook, and prepared to depart. As I drove away, the memory of that night, the sound of breaking glass, the accusatory stare of my corrupted self, the overwhelming surge of emotions, remained etched in my mind. I no longer knew whether I had truly rid myself of the haunting presence or if it lay dormant, waiting for another moment of vulnerability to emerge again. Each reflective surface in the passing landscape, a polished car fender, a window glinting in the morning sun, even the rippling surface of a roadside puddle, made me pause. A reminder that the battle between light and darkness, self-acceptance and despair, was never truly over. Even now, as I recount this experience, I struggle with the uncertainty of whether the curse of the shattered mirror has been broken or merely suppressed. I have returned to the world of photography, though my lens now captures not just the beauty of nature, but also the fragile, hidden reflections of the human soul. I know that the scars I bear are both physical and emotional, reminders that sometimes our inner demons can manifest in ways that defy simple explanation. I continue to travel, seeking solace and meaning in fleeting moments of quiet beauty, yet every so often, when the light is just right, I catch a glimpse of a dark, fleeting shadow in a reflective surface, a reminder that in the quiet corners of our world, the line between reality and the manifestations of our own guilt is perilously thin. And though I have moved on, the shattered reflections of that fateful night remain with me, an indelible mark on my soul and a constant challenge to the fragile boundaries of who I am and who I fear I might become. My name is Nina Collins. I'm 42 years old, and this happened at Mathieson State Park during an early fall when the crisp air hinted at winter's approach, and the forest's ancient whispers felt more like warnings than breezes. I had once devoted my life to conservation biology, working passionately to protect the wild places I loved. But a single catastrophic decision, a project I endorsed that ended in irreversible ecological damage, had shattered my career and left me racked with guilt. Seeking both redemption and the spark of inspiration that I'd lost, I rented an old RV and retreated into the solitude of Mathieson State Park. I hoped that, amid the rugged canyons, towering pines, and weathered rock formations, I might find a way to mend my shattered self. I parked my aging RV in a secluded clearing near a trail that meandered deep into the forest. The area was quiet, with only the gentle rustling of leaves and distant bird calls to accompany me. I spent the first day setting up my temporary home, arranging my meager gear, camera, and notebook, and then ventured out on a walk. The forest seemed timeless. Each tree, each rock, every shifting shadow carried a weight of history and secrets. As I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being observed by something both ancient and alive. That first night, I lay awake listening to the wind. Amid the regular susurrus of the pines, I began to notice a soft, melodic whisper, a cadence that rose and fell as though someone, or something, were speaking in a language older than words. I told myself it was merely the wind through the leaves, a trick of my fatigued mind. But as the night wore on, the whispers became too distinct to ignore. They spoke in hushed tones, almost like an incantation, echoing in the spaces between the trees. The next morning, I reviewed some of the photos I'd taken at dusk. Most images captured the natural beauty of fading light over the rugged terrain, but in a few shots I found something unsettling. A fleeting glimmer of green among the pines, like a pair of luminous eyes peering from the darkness. I adjusted the exposure and checked again, convinced it was an artifact of low light. Yet the sight persisted in more than one image, leaving me with a prickling sensation that I was not alone in this forest. Determined to explore further, I set out on a daytime hike. The forest was alive with color, vivid red and gold leaves, delicate wildflowers peeking through the undergrowth, and the earthy scent of moss and damp soil. As I wandered off the beaten path, I came upon a small clearing dotted with weathered stone carvings and petroglyphs. The carvings depicted a hooded figure entwined with vines and trees, its eyes large and luminous, as though it were meant to mirror the very soul of the forest. I knelt to examine them, feeling an inexplicable connection to the symbols, as if they were a silent chronicle of the land's ancient guardians. I made several notes in my journal, documenting the style of the carvings and the arrangement of the stones. Local indigenous lore often spoke of a forest spirit, a guardian of nature whose presence was both protective and, when angered, sternly punitive. The legends described the spirit as a luminous, moss-draped figure with emerald eyes that would appear among the pines when the natural balance was disturbed. I couldn't help but wonder if the mysterious glimmers in my photographs were a glimpse of that very presence. Returning to the RV later that day, I began to feel that something was amiss. The forest itself seemed to shift around me. Paths I had taken earlier appeared altered, as if the land was rearranging itself. At times, familiar landmarks seemed to vanish behind curtains of fog or mist. In the reflective surface of a small pond near the clearing, I saw a fleeting silhouette, a figure with eyes that glowed like deep green embers. I rubbed my eyes and looked again, but the figure was gone, leaving only ripples in the water. That evening, as dusk fell and the forest was draped in twilight, I sat inside the RV reviewing the day's photos. My hands trembled as I zoomed in on one of the images, trying to capture the detail of that spectral glimmer. It was then I noticed something else, the sound of whispering. At first, it was so faint I thought it was the hum of the RV's old engine, but gradually it rose in volume, intermingling with the natural sounds outside. The voice was soft, melodic, and laced with an undercurrent of sorrow and warning. My scientific mind battled with the rising tide of dread. I had always been a skeptic, relying on empirical evidence and data. Yet the more I documented these occurrences, the more I felt that the forest was trying to communicate with me through signs, symbols, and subtle manipulations of its environment. I began to question whether these were mere hallucinations brought on by isolation and guilt, or if there was something truly supernatural at work. Over the following nights, the manifestations grew bolder. In the reflective surfaces of the RV, a cracked window here, the glint of a metal surface there, I began to see a green-eyed figure moving silently behind me. At times, I would catch a glimpse of it in the mirror of the RV's refrigerator door, or even in the dark, still water that pooled near the base of an old oak. The figure was never fully revealed, always at the periphery of my vision, but its presence was undeniable and unnerving. One particularly foggy night, I decided to take a walk along a narrow trail leading deeper into the forest. The moon was a pale crescent, and the mist clung to the underbrush like a living shroud. Every step I took felt heavy with the weight of unseen eyes. The whispering returned, louder now, as if echoing from the very heart of the forest. I paused frequently, straining to understand the fragmented phrases that drifted on the wind. They seemed to be calling me, urging me to remember and to repent. As I neared a clearing encircled by ancient stone relics, the very petroglyphs I had seen earlier, the air grew charged with a palpable energy. I felt as though the forest were holding its breath. Then, amid the silence, I saw it. Emerging from the shifting shadows stood the verdant guardian in full form. It was a luminous figure, draped in moss and adorned with subtle, ever-changing patterns of light. Its eyes, a vivid and unnerving emerald, met mine with an intensity that sent chills racing down my spine. I froze, my heart pounding in my ears, as the figure stood motionless among a ring of weathered stones. In that surreal moment, I felt a rush of images and emotions that were not my own. Memories of the forest's ancient cycles, of both life and decay, and of a balance long maintained by forces beyond human understanding. Through a series of vivid impressions that were almost telepathic, the guardian conveyed its message. I understood, not in words, but in a deep, resonant feeling, that the wounds of nature mirrored the wounds within me. The guardian's presence was a judgment, a call for me to acknowledge the damage wrought by my past actions and to strive for healing. Tears welled in my eyes as I stood there, overwhelmed by a mixture of awe, fear, and remorse. I had spent so long running from my guilt, from the consequences of decisions made in haste and hubris. Now, confronted by this living embodiment of the forest's ancient soul, I knew that I had to atone, not only for myself, but in some small way for the land that had suffered at my hands. I left the clearing and returned to the RV, my mind reeling with what I had experienced. That night the whispering subsided to a gentle murmur, and the forest seemed to exhale, as if relieved that I had listened. I spent the following day carefully reviewing the relics and the notes I had taken. I gathered wildflowers from the surrounding meadows, delicate blooms that the wind scattered across the forest floor, and prepared to return to the clearing. At dusk, armed with my camera, notebook, and the wildflowers clutched in trembling hands, I walked back to the ancient clearing. The stones stood silent sentinel around a small, open space, and the air was thick with anticipation. I knelt before the stones, arranged the flowers in a small circle, and, with a voice choked by emotion, recited an apology. I spoke of my failures, my regret for contributing to nature's pain, and my determination to make amends. My words were simple and raw, carried away on the breeze as if the forest itself were listening. For several long minutes, nothing happened. Then, as if in response, the wind picked up, and the murmur of the trees deepened into a soft, rhythmic chant. The oppressive energy that had haunted the clearing began to dissipate, replaced by a serene calm. I felt a warmth on my face, as if the very spirit of the forest were touching me in gratitude. The guardian did not appear again in that moment, but I sensed its presence in every rustle of leaves, every shift of shadow. I returned to the RV with a cautious sense of renewal. Over the next few days, the strange phenomena subsided to subtle hints. A glimmer in a puddle here, a soft whisper on the breeze there, but the overwhelming dread had been replaced by a profound, albeit uneasy, peace. I continued to document the forest, my photographs now imbued with both beauty and a lingering sense of mystery. I wrote extensively in my journal about my journey, not only as a conservationist but as a flawed human being, striving to learn from her past. When it was finally time to leave, I packed up my RV with mixed emotions. I knew that I had not solved all the mysteries of the forest, nor had I entirely exorcised the ghosts of my own making. But I had taken a vital step toward redemption. The forest, with its ancient wisdom and inscrutable power, had shown me that healing was possible, if only one was willing to listen and to change. As I drove away from Mathewson State Park, the images of the lush pines, the weathered stones, and the haunting emerald gaze of the verdant guardian stayed with me. I still question whether the guardian was merely a supernatural manifestation or a symbolic reflection of my inner turmoil made real. But one truth remains. The forest has its own language, one that transcends human logic and speaks directly to the soul. And in that language, I found not only rebuke, but also forgiveness. Now, whenever I pause in a moment of quiet reflection, whether while looking at a tranquil lake or a glinting car window, I sometimes catch a hint of green, a whisper of the ancient spirit that once showed me the way to atonement. I know that my past will always be a part of me, and that nature with all its mysteries will forever hold both beauty and judgment in equal measure. Yet, I carry with me the hope that every living thing, even a wounded heart, can learn to heal under the watchful gaze of something as timeless as the forest itself. My name is Jeremy Price. I'm 28 years old, and this happened at Rock Cut State Park in early fall, when the crisp air and fiery hues of the woods set a haunting stage for a night I'll never forget. I'd spent the last few years feeling adrift. Once an aspiring musician with dreams of creating soulful, stirring melodies, my world had collapsed after my band broke up and rejection piled on relentlessly. Creative block and a deep, unyielding grief had robbed me of the spark that had once driven me to pour my heart into every note I played. In a desperate bid to reclaim my muse, and perhaps to heal a wounded soul, I loaded my aging RV with the few possessions I cared to bring, packed my trusty recorder in a battered notebook, and headed for the solitude of the Rock Cut State Park. I believed that the isolation and raw beauty of nature might remind me of what I had lost, and, in the process, inspire a rebirth of my music. After a long drive through winding country roads, I finally pulled into a secluded clearing near a quiet lake at the edge of the park. The autumn landscape was mesmerizing. Trees ablaze in oranges, reds, and deep purples, their leaves crunching underfoot, and a stillness that was both inviting and ominous. I set up camp with a hopeful heart, determined to let the natural rhythm of the park mend my battered creativity. That first night, I settled into the cramped comfort of my RV, its walls adorned with memories of past tours and studio sessions. I intended to simply sit in silence, letting the night work its magic. Yet, as I lay awake listening to the nocturnal chorus of crickets and the occasional rustle of wind in the trees, something unusual reached my ears. A faint, distant sound that, at first, I assumed was nothing more than the whisper of the wind. But, as minutes turned into an hour, the sound grew clearer. A delicate, almost mournful fiddle melody that floated through the darkness like a half-remembered lullaby. Its notes were achingly beautiful, imbued with a sorrow that resonated deep within me. I sat up, heart thumping, straining to catch every nuance, wondering if exhaustion was playing tricks on my mind. I reached for my phone and recorded a snippet, even though I wasn't sure what I had just heard. For the next few nights, that spectral melody returned with an almost relentless regularity. Each time I lay in bed, the soft strains of the fiddle seemed to echo my own internal lament, stirring feelings of both despair and an inexplicable hope. I began to save the recordings, replaying them in my mind until the notes merged with my own memories of lost dreams and broken promises. The melody was beautiful, but there was something unsettling in its tone. A warning, perhaps, hidden in the strains of the music. Driven by a mix of curiosity and a longing I couldn't quite articulate, I decided one moonlit night to follow the sound. I stepped out of the RV with nothing but my recorder, a flashlight, and an overwhelming sense of determination. The path was dark, lit only by the silver glow of a crescent moon, and the melody, now almost hypnotic, drew me deeper into the forest. Every step felt charged with significance, as if the forest itself were urging me onward. I couldn't help but wonder if this was the very muse I had been seeking, a spirit incarnate in music. The trail eventually opened into a small clearing, encircled by ancient trees whose gnarled branches reached toward the heavens. In the center of the clearing, bathed in ethereal moonlight, I saw him. A spectral figure that seemed both out of time and unmistakably real. There, standing with a tattered coat and a worn hat shadowing a face of deep sorrow, was a man playing a fiddle. The instrument glowed faintly with an otherworldly light, its notes drifting on the cool autumn air. I froze in place, transfixed by the sight. The figure's eyes, hauntingly luminous and filled with despair, met mine as if he were challenging me to come closer. I couldn't tell whether I was dreaming or if my senses had finally betrayed me completely. The fiddler played on, his melody stirring the very atmosphere around him. I felt an overwhelming pull, as if the music was reaching into the deepest parts of my soul, promising a wellspring of creative brilliance. But with that promise came a palpable risk, a sense that, in surrendering to the music, I might lose myself entirely, my identity dissolving into the spectral strains of a ghostly lament. My mind raced. I remembered the warnings in old local lore, that a brilliant fiddler had once vanished under mysterious circumstances in these woods, rumored to have made a bargain with forces beyond mortal ken. Some said he was claimed by the forest, condemned to an eternity of wandering as a spirit, his music both a blessing and a curse to those who heard it. The melody, so achingly beautiful yet tinged with despair, seemed to offer the same dual promise, a chance at rediscovery, but at the perilous cost of one's very soul. I felt the melody wrap around me like a silken shroud. For a moment, all my doubts melted away. I stepped forward, drawn inexorably toward the fiddler, each step echoing the beat of my own heart. But as I approached, a sudden surge of clarity jolted me. In that brief instant, I recognized that I was teetering on the edge of surrender, on the brink of losing myself in this eerie, supernatural allure. The fiddler's eyes, filled with centuries of sorrow, seemed to mirror my own internal torment, and I realized that to succumb fully would be to let my creative spirit, along with my sense of self, be consumed by the ghostly tune. A fierce battle raged within me in that silent clearing. The fiddler's melody swelled around me, each note a seductive invitation to forget the pain of my past, to merge with an eternal, unchanging song. Yet my heart, battered by loss and failure, also cried out for the chance to reclaim what I had once been, a man who dared to dream, who held onto his identity even in the face of overwhelming despair. With every ounce of willpower I possessed, I forced myself to step back. The melody, though still intoxicating, began to lose its grip on my mind. I turned and stumbled away from the clearing, my legs trembling as I retraced the path back to the safety of my RV. Behind me, the fiddler continued to play, a lament that seemed to follow me through the trees until it faded into the rustle of leaves. At dawn, I returned to the RV, shaken and unsure of what had transpired. The recordings on my phone captured only fragments of the melody, its edges blurred by the chill of night and the haze of my near-trance state. Yet I knew that what I had experienced was no mere hallucination. I had come face to face with a supernatural presence, one that embodied both the beauty and the peril of artistic inspiration. In the days that followed, I remained at the park, my mind a tumult of conflicting emotions. I continued to record the faint echoes of the fiddler's tune each night, but the spectral figure never reappeared. Instead, I found myself haunted by its memory, the ghostly image of a man in tattered clothes, his sorrowful eyes a constant reminder of the cost of creative brilliance. I spent hours in my RV, scribbling down lyrics and chords, trying to harness that haunting melody without losing myself to it. My music began to take on a darker, more introspective tone, its beauty tempered by the chill of near obsession. Yet, even as I poured my soul into my recordings, a persistent unease nagged at me. I couldn't shake the feeling that the fiddler's lament was a warning, a reminder that while art could be transcendent, it could also be destructive if embraced without caution. I began to fear that every note I played, every chord I strummed, might carry with it the risk of losing a piece of myself, much like the ghostly musician who had vanished into legend. One crisp, early fall morning, as the sun rose over the rugged treetops and painted the sky in muted golds and reds, I packed up my RV with a heavy heart. I had come seeking inspiration and renewal, and in many ways I had found it. But I also realized that some mysteries, no matter how alluring, were best left undisturbed. The fiddler's lament had shown me that creative brilliance might come at too high a price, a sacrifice of identity that I wasn't willing to pay. As I drove away from Rock Cut State Park, the memory of that moonlit clearing and the ghostly melody lingered in my mind. I carried with me a new song, a bittersweet tune that encapsulated both the beauty and the danger of artistic obsession. I knew that the spectral figure, with his sorrowful eyes and eternal lament, would forever be a part of my story, a haunting reminder that while inspiration might be found in the darkest corners, it is our responsibility to hold on to ourselves amidst the allure of the unknown. Now, whenever I sit down to write or play, I remember that fateful night. I remind myself that art, however transcendent, must never come at the cost of who we are. And though the ghostly strains of the fiddler's tune sometimes echo in the back of my mind, I choose to play my music on my own terms, a testament to the delicate balance between passion and self-preservation, between the seductive beauty of the unknown and the necessity of holding on to the self that created it. My name is Adrian Ross. I'm 50 years old, and this happened at Mississippi Palisades State Park in late autumn, when the chill in the air mingled with the scent of damp earth and rust. I had long since hung up my badge as a detective, though the unsolved case of those vanished mine workers still haunted me like a persistent shadow. Now, as a true crime author, I sought to confront my past, to unearth the truth behind that fateful cover-up, and, perhaps, finally lay my guilt to rest. I pulled my aging RV onto a narrow gravel road that wound its way to a secluded clearing near the old mining tunnels. The park, with its craggy cliffs and dense woodlands, looked every bit as foreboding as I remembered from my early days on the force. The remnants of the abandoned iron mine loomed in the distance, their rusted machinery and broken structures testament to a time when corporate greed and desperate labor collided in tragedy. I set up camp quietly, my heart heavy with memories of the case that had tormented me for decades. During the daylight hours, I revisited the scene of my former investigation. I walked the perimeter of the mine, careful not to disturb the decaying relics of the past. In a forgotten corner near a collapsed entrance, I discovered faded newspaper clippings and rusted mining tools half buried in the mud. One discovery, in particular, sent a chill down my spine. A battered diary belonging to one of the workers. Its pages, yellowed with age, recounted harrowing details of dangerous working conditions, whispered accusations of a cover-up, and cryptic hints of voices that spoke of injustice in the dark. Each line seemed to call out to me, urging me to look deeper into the mystery I had once failed to solve. That night, as a relentless rain began to drum on the roof of my RV, I sat by a small electric heater and pored over the diary. The sound of the rain was punctuated by something else, a faint, rhythmic echo of footsteps along the rocky paths outside, as if someone, or something, was pacing in the darkness. I dismissed it at first as the wind or perhaps the settling of the old structures around me. But as the hours passed, the sounds grew more insistent. A low, mournful whisper that seemed to drift through the corridors of my RV. I couldn't shake the feeling that the park itself was trying to tell me something. On subsequent nights, the supernatural occurrences became harder to ignore. I began to notice strange impressions along the muddy trails near my camp. Footprints that were too deep, as if made by someone with a heavy, labored step. I even caught a glimpse of a shadowy figure reflected in a rain-soaked puddle. An indistinct silhouette with eyes that, for a moment, glowed with an eerie light. Each time I would grab my camera and try to capture evidence, though the images were always blurred by the driving rain and the low light of the storm. One particularly stormy evening, unable to sleep, I ventured out with my flashlight and a notebook. The wind whipped through the trees, and the rain fell in sheets, transforming the familiar landscape into a chaotic swirl of dark shapes. As I trudged along a path that skirted the edge of the old mine, I felt a strange pull, a sensation that there was something I was meant to find. My instincts, honed over years on the force, told me that the case was not yet closed. After what felt like endless minutes in the driving rain, I arrived at a spot that sent a shiver through me. A long-sealed entrance to the mine, hidden by overgrown brush and slick with rain. There was something oddly compelling about it, as though the very ground was urging me to enter. With a mix of dread and determination, I cleared away the debris and pried open the rusted iron gate that barred the way. The metal groaned in protest, and for a moment I hesitated, feeling the weight of the decades of silence that lay beyond. Inside, the mine was a labyrinth of dark, narrow tunnels. My flashlight cut through the gloom, revealing walls streaked with rust and water, and floors littered with the detritus of a long-forgotten era. Every step I took echoed, mingling with the distant sound of dripping water and the soft murmur of the wind through unseen crevices. As I ventured deeper, the temperature dropped, and a sense of foreboding gripped me. I couldn't shake the impression that I was being watched. Then, in the oppressive silence of a particularly narrow corridor, I saw it. A figure at the edge of the light, nearly blending with the shadows. I froze, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure it would give me away. Slowly, I raised my flashlight to illuminate the figure. There, emerging from the darkness, was the Ironwood Harbinger. The Harbinger was unlike any specter I had ever imagined. Its form was gaunt and elongated, as if carved from the very metal that once powered the mine. Its skin had a metallic ashen quality, rusted, decayed, yet strangely beautiful in its otherworldly glow. but it was the eyes that held me transfixed, hollow, sorrowful, and glowing with an unearthly light, as if they contained the very anguish of the mine itself. For a long, silent moment, we simply stared at each other. In that charged atmosphere, I felt the full weight of the past, years of unresolved guilt, the haunting memories of a case left unsolved, and the pain of lives lost to corporate neglect and treacherous conditions. The harbinger did not speak, yet its presence conveyed a torrent of emotion. I sensed anger, sorrow, and a silent warning. It was as if the spirit was not only a guardian of the lost souls who perished in the mine, but also a messenger, urging me to confront the truth I had long evaded. The spectral figure slowly advanced, its steps measured and deliberate. I instinctively took a step back, my breath catching in my throat. I reached for my notebook, scribbling down every detail. Its appearance, the strange metallic scent that now filled the narrow tunnel, the way the light from my flashlight played across its features. I recalled the diary's words about the worker who had dared to expose the mine's horrors before vanishing without a trace. Had this harbinger been that very man, twisted by injustice and bound forever to the ruins of the mine? In that moment, the harbinger's eyes seemed to flash with an intensity that went beyond mere sorrow. I felt an overwhelming surge of responsibility, as though the spirit were laying the burden of its tragedy squarely upon my shoulders. The realization was almost too much to bear. My failure to solve the case, my inability to bring justice to the forgotten workers, had allowed the injustice and the pain to fester into something spectral, a living embodiment of the lost lives. Trembling, I forced myself to speak, my voice barely a whisper in the oppressive darkness. "What do you want from me?" I asked, though I did not expect an answer in words. Instead, the harbinger turned slowly, its gaze fixed on a narrow passageway that led even deeper into the mine. It was as if it was beckoning me to follow. My logical mind battled with my sense of duty. I had come here searching for answers, for closure after years of haunted regret. And now, faced with this living reminder of those unresolved mysteries, I knew I had to push forward, even if it meant confronting the very embodiment of my failures. I took a deep breath, and with the harbinger's silent invitation echoing in my ears, I stepped forward into the darkness. The tunnel eventually opened into a small cavern, where the remnants of mining operations lay scattered like forgotten relics. There, amid the debris, I found the final piece of the puzzle, a rusted, overturned crate bearing the insignia of the mining company, its surface pitted by years of neglect and decay. Behind the crate, half buried in the damp earth, lay a bundle of personal items: a frayed cap, a faded photograph of a group of miners, and a battered journal. My hands shook as I carefully unearthed the journal. Its pages were filled with desperate scribbles, accounts of harsh conditions, and accusations of a cover-up so vast that it silenced dissent and claimed lives. As I read, tears blurred my vision. The journal detailed the plight of the workers, their daily struggles, the cruelty of the overseers, and the silent resignation that led them to accept their fate. In its final, hastily scrawled lines, the miner wrote of a supernatural presence that would rise to avenge the injustice if the truth were ever uncovered. The words resonated deeply with me. I realized that my pursuit of the truth was not just a personal quest for redemption, but a responsibility to honor those who had been forgotten. At that moment, the harbinger reappeared at the mouth of the cavern, its sorrowful eyes fixed on me as if acknowledging my understanding. The spectral figure lingered, its presence a silent benediction and a somber reminder of the cost of inaction. I knew then that I could not leave this place unchanged. I had to expose the truth, to write a book that would lay bare the corporate greed and negligence that had led to such tragedies. I would give voice to the lost, and in doing so, perhaps find some measure of atonement for my own past failures. Shaken but resolute, I gathered the evidence, the diary, the personal effects, and countless photographs I had taken of the decrepit mine and its surroundings. I retraced my steps back through the winding tunnels, the harbinger watching silently from the darkness until I emerged back into the stormy night. Rain pounded the RV as I secured my findings, each drop echoing like a drumbeat of lost time. In the days that followed, I meticulously compiled my notes, photos, and recordings. I pored over every detail, determined to craft a narrative that honored the memory of those who had suffered and to confront the legacy of injustice head-on. The spectral encounter with the ironwood harbinger had left an indelible mark on me. Its silent, mournful presence was a reminder that some truths, no matter how painful, must be faced. When it was finally time to leave Mississippi Palisades State Park, I loaded my RV with the evidence and a heavy heart. As I drove away along the winding roads, I glanced back at the cliffs and the dark outline of the old mine. In the distance, on a rocky outcrop overlooking the Mississippi River, I thought I saw a faint, ghostly figure. A final farewell from the harbinger, standing vigil over the secrets of the past. Now, as I sit at my desk and write the story of what I experienced, I realize that the case is far from over. The truth, once unearthed, demands to be told, even if it carries the weight of sorrow and regret. I have resolved to expose the injustice that silenced so many lives, and in doing so perhaps ease the burden of my own guilt. The ironwood harbinger, that spectral guardian of the mine, will forever remain a part of my journey, a silent sentinel, reminding me that the past is never truly buried, and that some spirits linger long enough to guide us toward redemption. Even now, on stormy nights when the wind howls and the rain beats against my windows, I sometimes hear a distant echo of footsteps on rocky paths and the faint murmur of voices in the darkness, and I know that somewhere, in the forgotten corridors of time and memory, the harbinger watches over the secrets of the mine, urging us all to remember the cost of silence and the price of truth. My name is Claire Donovan. I'm 35 years old, and this happened at Starved Rock State Park in early autumn, when the mornings were crisp, the foliage blazed with brilliant hues, and the long brooding evenings hinted at secrets buried deep in the sandstone cliffs. I had come to the park to escape the chaos of Chicago and, more importantly, to escape the relentless guilt that had haunted me ever since I approved several urban development projects that, in hindsight, decimated precious natural habitats. As an urban planner and architect, I once prided myself on visionary designs and bold innovations. But those same ambitions led me down a path where profit trumped preservation, and nature paid the price. Seeking both creative inspiration and a measure of redemption, I rented an old RV and headed west, hoping that a few days alone in the wild might help me mend the pieces of my fractured conscience. I parked my battered RV in a quiet clearing near one of the park's most famous sandstone formations. The sight of the rugged cliffs, their surfaces etched by centuries of wind and water, filled me with both awe and an inexplicable unease. I spent the first day setting up camp, arranging my few belongings with deliberate care, and taking long reflective walks along the winding trails that skirted the canyons and overlooked the meandering river below. That first night, as darkness fell and the world outside my RV turned a deep, velvety blue, I settled in with a book and a cup of lukewarm coffee. The only sounds were the distant murmur of the river and the soft rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze. Yet, as I lay in the quiet, I began to notice something odd. In the flickering light of my camp lantern, the rugged faces of the sandstone seemed to change. Faint, human-like shapes appeared in the rock, their outlines shifting in the half-light. I could have sworn that for a moment I saw a pair of dark, unblinking eyes staring back at me from a crevice, only to vanish when I blinked. I told myself it was the play of light and shadow, a trick of my tired mind. But even as I closed my eyes, a low whisper, almost like the murmur of distant voices, drifted through the night air. The next morning, determined to shake off my uneasy feeling, I set out for a hike along a scenic overlook. I wanted to capture the natural beauty that had once inspired me. The landscape was breathtaking. The sandstone cliffs glowed in the soft light of dawn, and the river below shimmered like a silver ribbon. As I walked, I met an elderly man sitting on a weathered bench overlooking the valley. He introduced himself as Mr. Jacobs, a 70-year-old local historian who had lived in the area his entire life. Over a thermos of lukewarm tea, Mr. Jacobs shared stories of the land, of its natural splendor and its darker past. He told me of Richard Langley, a 19th century tycoon and land developer whose ruthless greed had left scars on the very earth. According to local legend, Langley's insatiable hunger for profit led him to exploit every resource in the region. When a catastrophic accident at one of his iron mines claimed the lives of countless workers, and his attempts to cover it up only deepened the tragedy, Langley vanished without a trace. Some said his spirit was cursed to wander these lands as retribution, a ghostly reminder that nature would never forgive the exploitation it suffered. Mr. Jacobs spoke of the legend in hushed tones, his eyes glimmering with both sorrow and quiet indignation, and mentioned a spectral figure known to the locals as the Stone-Eyed Wraith. Intrigued and unsettled by his story, I made a mental note to research further at the park's visitor center later that day. But that night, as I sat in the RV reviewing the few blurry images I had snapped of the cliff faces, I began to notice even more peculiar details. My camera, which I had left set on a timer to capture the natural light, had recorded vague, shadowy shapes that I couldn't explain. In one image, a dark silhouette appeared near a deep fissure in the rock, a figure with features so faint I almost dismissed it as an artifact of low light. Yet, in another, a pair of eyes, cold and unyielding like carved stone, seemed to stare out from the darkness. The whispers from the previous night had returned, this time seeming to echo from the very cliffs themselves, as if the rock was trying to tell its own story. Over the following days, the signs grew more persistent. I took long hikes along the narrow trails, always with my camera at the ready. At dusk, as the sky turned from gold to a deep, melancholic red, I often saw the outlines of a figure blending with the rugged stone. In the still water of roadside puddles and in the reflective surfaces of my RV windows, I would catch a fleeting glimpse of what I could only describe as a spectral gaze. Cold, unmoving eyes that resembled the texture of ancient rock. At the visitor center, I pored over old newspaper clippings and local records. I learned that Richard Langley's story was more than mere legend. There were accounts of protests, of families mourning the loss of their loved ones, and of a community scarred by the exploitation of nature. The records spoke of strange occurrences around the time of the tragedy. Unexplained sounds, shifting shadows, and an overwhelming sense of doom. The locals believed that Langley's spirit had been transformed into a guardian of the land, a living curse that would forever remind future generations of the consequences of greed. The Stone-Eyed Wraith, as he was called, had become a symbol of nature's wrath. I tried to convince myself that these were just tales meant to warn the unwary, but as the days passed, I found that the supernatural encounters were too real to ignore. One evening, After a particularly vivid sunset had bathed the sandstone in blood-red hues, I decided to explore one of the lesser-known trails that led closer to the base of the cliffs. The air was cool and crisp, and a gentle wind rustled the fallen leaves, creating an eerie symphony of sound. As I navigated the winding path, I felt an almost magnetic pull toward a narrow crevice in the rock, a natural fissure that I hadn't noticed before. My pulse quickened as I stepped closer, and there, in the fading light, I saw it. A face etched into the stone, its features blurred by time but unmistakably human. The eyes, those unyielding, stone-cold eyes, seemed to follow my every movement. A chill ran down my spine. I stood there for several long minutes, entranced and horrified, before finally retreating back to my RV. That night, a fierce autumn storm rolled in, the wind howling and the rain lashing against the RV's metal sides. I could barely sleep as thunder rumbled in the distance, and the relentless patter of rain drowned out all thought. In the midst of the storm, I found myself drawn outside, compelled by a force I could neither explain nor resist. Clad in a heavy jacket and clutching my flashlight, I stepped out into the chaos, determined to face the mysterious presence that had haunted my every step. I made my way to a rocky outcrop overlooking the valley. The storm's fury made every step treacherous, and the wind whipped my hair into my face, but I pressed on. In a flash of lightning, I saw him, the stone-eyed wraith. There, atop the rugged cliff, stood a gaunt, spectral figure draped in tattered, antiquated clothing. His face was a mask of sorrow and rage, and his eyes were exactly as Mr. Jacobs had described, cold, unblinking, and carved of stone. In that terrifying moment, time itself seemed to pause. I could feel his gaze piercing through me, as if he were weighing my very soul, asking silently, "What will you do when nature demands its due?" The intensity of the encounter overwhelmed me. I staggered back, my heart pounding so fiercely that I was sure it would burst from my chest. The figure did not move. He simply stood there, an eternal sentinel against the backdrop of the storm. I could do nothing but watch as lightning illuminated his spectral form, etching his tragic visage into my memory forever. I retreated to the safety of my RV, drenched and trembling. For the remainder of the stormy night, I could barely sleep. My mind replayed the image of those stone eyes, and every flash of lightning in my dreams seemed to bring the wraith back to life. In the cold light of morning, the storm had passed, but the echoes of that encounter lingered in every crevice of my mind. Over the next few days, I dedicated myself to documenting every detail of my experience. I reviewed the photographs, studied my notes, and listened repeatedly to the soft, disembodied whispers that had haunted me in the night. I also continued to meet with Mr. Jacobs, whose insights into the local lore only deepened the mystery. He spoke of the consequences of unchecked ambition, of how the land never forgets those who exploit it. His words resonated with my own guilt and regret, and I found myself questioning every decision that had led me to this moment. I began to see the stone-eyed wraith not merely as a ghostly apparition, but as a manifestation of nature's unyielding retribution, a warning that the scars we inflict on the earth come at a price. The more I delved into the legend, the more I understood that my own inner turmoil was now entwined with this ancient curse. My work in urban planning had once seemed noble, but in hindsight, it had contributed to the exploitation of the natural world. The wraith's silent, accusatory stare was a mirror reflecting my own failures, a reminder that I could no longer hide behind the veneer of progress and innovation. One crisp morning, as I prepared to pack up my RV, I took one last drive along the winding roads of starved rock. The landscape, bathed in the soft glow of an overcast sky, looked both beautiful and mournful. As I passed a roadside puddle, I slowed down to catch my reflection in its rain-washed surface. And there, for just a moment, I swear, I saw a pair of cold, unyielding stone eyes staring back at me from the rippling water, a final, silent vow from the land that the consequences of our actions are never easily forgotten. I left Starved Rock State Park that day, physically intact but forever changed. The encounter with the stone-eyed wraith, and the weight of the legend it embodied, had forced me to confront my past and the irreversible damage wrought by unchecked ambition. I returned to Chicago with a heavy heart and a newfound commitment to champion sustainable, respectful development, and to use my work as a means of atoning for past mistakes. Now, as I sit at my desk in a modest apartment overlooking the city, I write these words as both a confession and a reminder. I remember every detail, the eerie whispers, the shifting shadows on sandstone, and most of all, those unblinking stone eyes that judged me without mercy. I have learned that nature is a living force, ancient and unforgiving, and that every decision we make leaves an indelible mark on the world. I carry the memory of the wraith with me always, a constant reminder that the past cannot be undone, and that redemption is a lifelong journey. Whenever I catch a glimpse of a rugged cliff or see a glint of stone in a reflective surface, I am reminded of that fateful encounter at Starved Rock. I know that nature, in all its raw power and timeless wisdom, will continue to speak its truth to those willing to listen, even if that truth comes in the form of a silent, spectral guardian with eyes of stone.